Hi, welcome to Book Club. I'm CM Vazquez, author of The Birdcage Society Falling, the first in an ongoing psychological mystery series. Today I'm going to be giving my impressions of Darkly Dreaming Dexter, Chapter 5. This chapter starts off with Dexter's morning commute. He describes grabbing donuts, eating one on the way to work, all while noticing the other driver's reaction to slower drivers on the road, and then describes a crash where a milk truck has collided with a van filled with Catholic school kids. What I find interesting about this scene is that Dexter talks about it with such nonchalance, as if this is an everyday occurrence, just something to be expected on a rainy day on a Miami highway. I wouldn't think anything of it if he had simply stated there was a crash and ended it at that. But he noted that there was little girls sitting in spilled milk on the side of the road with dazed expressions on their faces, even talking about a kid being airlifted to the hospital. But it was with such a disconnect that he may as well have been talking about the weather, which, to be honest, is expected at this point from Dexter. When he arrives at work, Deb is waiting for him and angry that he ignored her calls the night before. She says that she's being shut out of the case, but Dexter remarks that it shouldn't be a surprise, given that LaGuerta feels pretty poorly about Deb. I'm wondering if there's an underlying cause for why LaGuerta hates Deb so much. I think it might be, as I suspect, that she hates Deb on principle, simply for being a woman. I think she's threatened by her. Now, I do like the way Dexter describes Deb during this interaction as she peers into the bag that houses his other donut. Then, of course, she eats it. He says the line, "She pulled the cruller out of the bag and savaged it." I love that line. I think it gives the impression that Dexter feels either that he feels very strongly about his pastries, or this is just the way he thinks, and I'm going to continue to be pretty tickled by the way he thinks and speaks. I think that readers will find this character Dexter to be pretty relatable, and may even be surprised by that. Outside of him being a serial killer and a potential psychopath, of course, since his psychopathy has not been confirmed, Dexter seems to have, for most things, I think that we have experienced some form of disconnect when we think that we should be feeling something in a certain scenario, but we just aren't. I also think that Dexter's relatability is a device that Jeff Lindsay is using to gain favor for Dexter, because he is a serial killer, and only killing bad people might not be enough for certain readers. So I think Lindsay wrote Dexter in a way that readers would like him, maybe even find parts of themselves in him too. It's chapter 5, so not too far into the book, but tell me how you feel about Dexter so far. Do you find him relatable? Do you like him? Do you hate him? Let me know. So by this point in the book, Dexter is, or has used 3 different names for his sister. At this point, he has referred to her as Deborah, Deb, and also Debbie. I think this is a form of endearment for him. Instead of giving her playful nicknames, he just uses variations of her name. And you know, I'm pretty firm on believing that he does care about Deb, even if he says he's incapable of feeling much. He says he tried having relationships in order to fit into Harry's plan, but none of them worked out. Sooner or later, they catch him being fake, and animals seem to be afraid of him too, so no pets. He says that nothing and no one loves him, except for Deb. Not even he loves himself. I think this suggests that Dexter's lonely, that he wants to know what it feels like to love and be loved. On the surface, he knows Deb loves him, but the feeling is still foreign to him. So back to the scenario, back to the scene. Deb questions him on what he knows about the case. He tries to lead her in the right direction, but since her brain doesn't work in quite the same way his does, she finds it pretty difficult. She comes up with nothing. So he gives in and tells her that the killer wasn't interrupted and there's no witness like LaGuerta seems to think there is. The killer is trying to do something that they can't quite get right and will keep trying until he does. So Deb ends up rushing off to figure out a way to catch the killer when he eventually tries again. This will give Deb, if it works out, it will give Deb a one-up on LaGuerta. And while I do think it will help to get her into homicide, I also think that there's going to be some blowback and some type of altercation with Deb and LaGuerta because of it. Dexter goes on to describe his work for the rest of the day. He analyzes blood spatters from a crime scene where a man used a chainsaw on 2 people. He is able to glean from his analysis that the man wears a size 7.5 shoe. He's overweight, right-handed, and has a terrific backhand. He thinks about what would happen to himself if he were ever to be careless enough to allow himself to be caught. Well, maybe not necessarily allow, but if he was careless enough to be caught, he said he would be labeled as a sociopathic killer, as a monster and less than human. Pretty much a demon, basically. And they'd put him in the electric chair, for sure. I wonder if Dexter is projecting the way he feels about himself in this moment a little bit as well. But he says that if this man, the chainsaw killing man, is caught, then he'll go to jail, most likely for 10 years, and come out with his chainsaw at the ready once again. The chapter ends with Dexter thinking that every workday he understands Harry just a little bit more. And I can't say I blame him. Well, that concludes my impressions of Chapter 5 of Darkly Dreaming Dexter. Join me on Friday for Chapter 6. Look forward to seeing you, hearing from you in the comments. Bye.